Good morning and welcome to another episode of Live Without Limits, Unlock Your Potential, Ultimate Blueprint to Transform Your Mindset, where we dive deep into the thoughts, behaviors, and habits that shape our lives. I'm Davida Shinsky, and today we're tackling a topic that many of us have encountered but may not fully understand: the blame game and how it can be used as a tool for manipulation and abuse. And I've experienced this firsthand, first by my mother and then by my sister, because she was considered the perfect one because the two older sisters have disabilities. And so she was allowed to get away with doing whatever she wanted to, and the blame was automatically put on someone else. We've all been there. Someone messes up, but instead of taking responsibility, they point the finger at someone else. Maybe you've experienced this in a relationship, at work, or even in your own family. It can feel frustrating, confusing, and even unfair. But when blaming becomes a pattern, when it's used to control, manipulate, or emotionally harm others, that's when it turns toxic. And the thing is, I grew up in a very toxic family. I had a father that physically abused, a mother that psychologically, financially, and emotionally abused her children because she didn't know any different. The problem is that back then, the mental health field and understanding what was going on and how when you need help, you get help, or to learn how to parent your children in a healthy relationship with them, it was not available. Therefore, it continued on into the present. That's why you see so many messed up people today, because they grew up in toxic families and they didn't know how to change or build healthy relationships. In relationships, this can look like a partner blaming you for their bad mood, their mistakes, or even their failures. In the workplace, it's the boss or coworker throwing you under the bus to cover up their incompetence. And in families, it can become a cycle where one person constantly places guilt and responsibility on others while avoiding their own. So today, we're going to break this down. We'll talk about why people engage in the blame game and what fuels this behavior, how it can be used as a tool for manipulation and emotional abuse, the psychological impact on those being blamed. And the one thing is, I'm also creating a course around this because I think we need to recognize it and we need to learn how to deal with it. And the thing is, if you're with someone who treats you that way, either both of you need to get counseling and build better communication, or just avoid each other. And most importantly, how you can recognize it, set boundaries, and protect yourself from becoming a target. So, stick with me, because by the end of this episode, you'll have the tools to spot the blame game for what it is and stop it in its tracks. Understanding the blame game. Now that we understand what the blame game is, let's dive into why people play it. You might be wondering what drives someone to constantly shift responsibility onto others. Well, there are a few key reasons. Fear. Many people use blame as a defense mechanism because they're afraid of the consequences. Admitting fault can make them feel vulnerable. So instead, they push the responsibility onto someone else to protect their ego and avoid punishment. Insecurity. Some people blame others because deep down they feel inadequate. They don't want to be seen as weak or incapable. So instead of facing their own shortcomings, they deflect. Power dynamics. Blame can also be a tool of control. When someone constantly places blame on others, they create a dynamic where they always appear right and others are always in the wrong. This can be a way to maintain dominance, especially in relationships or workplaces. Learned behavior. If someone grew up in an environment where blaming was the norm, where parents never took responsibility, or where they constantly blamed for things beyond their control, they might continue that pattern into adulthood. It becomes their default way of handling conflict or mistakes. And this is the environment that I grew up in because it was learned by my mother, it was learned by my sister, and both of them continue to use it throughout their lives. So, how the blame game manifests in different relationships. Blame doesn't just happen in one setting, it creeps into all areas of your life. Let's look at how it plays out in different relationships. Now, my sister became a teacher not because she wanted to be a teacher, but because she was pushed into it by my mother, because that's what my mother saw as a great profession. And true, at that time, there weren't that many options for women in the workplace. But here's the main thing. My sister had two sisters with disabilities. She resented them. She blamed them because she felt like she got the short stick, when in fact it was not their fault. And so she would abuse them, and my mother would allow her to do it. My mother stood there and watched her push my other sister against a trundle bed where she had bought a bed for herself and wanted to sleep in that bed, and my sister didn't want her to, because she never had a bed, because we had a 2-bedroom house. There was no room to put a third bed in there, and so my mother put a day bed in there for her to have. And then when they sold that, she slept in the den that the couch had a hide bed. So she resented that her sister had a bed. So she didn't want her to have a bed. So when my sister was taking the mattress to put it back on the twin bed, my other sister pushed her against the rails of the trundle bed with the mattress on top of her. And my mother did nothing because it was okay for her to abuse her sisters. But it wasn't okay for anyone to talk back to her or to abuse her. This is a typical relationship that creates the blame game. In romantic relationships, a partner might blame the other for their own emotions or failures, saying things like, if you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have gotten so angry. This shifts the responsibility away from them and onto their partner. In families, parents might blame children for their struggles, or siblings might use blame to manipulate each other. And this is what went on in my family. And the sad part was, because my older sister is deaf, and because her personality is a reserved personality, she allows them to continue to do this to them today. And because my personality was very outgoing, and because I used to question why me, and I began to start looking for other things, I began to recognize it. And I am very upfront and open. And because of that, because my mother controlled the money, and later my sister controls the money, she uses it as a weapon to blame others for her own shortfalls. But I can tell you this, she was a special ed teacher. She worked 30 years as a teacher, but she never stayed in the same school more than a year or two. And after 19 years, she had to take 3 years off before she could go back and finish up her last 11 years, and continued the pattern of never staying in the same school, to the point that the last year she taught, she had to change school systems. So there has to be a problem there, and to sit there and blame it on other people that it's their fault, and she never got along with her principals, it's an issue for her that just wasn't addressed, that my mother allowed her to continue to do it, and allowed her to continue to blame others. So recognize that in your family. In families, parents might blame children for their struggles, or siblings might blame each other to manipulate one another. In friendships, one person might constantly shift blame for arguments or problems, making it seem like they're never at fault. Workplace environments. Oh, and what I want to do before I get into workplace environments is say this, that my younger sister was in for Thanksgiving, and my older sister had not gotten, or when she got dressed, she put on old clothes. She made a change, but then she made her go wash her hair. So what did she do? She pulled her by the hair into the other room. And then as she was using the blower, she was using the brush and pulling it very, very hard, so that she was hurting her. And when I called the Association for the Deaf, they asked me, was Adult Protective Services ever called? Because we're all senior citizens now. We're all in our 70s. And I was told to call them and report it. And because I reported it, she's mad at me. She refuses to use the estate to take care of my needs, like buying me a toilet, paying a dental bill, buying clothes, buying shoes. And for me, buying shoes is not just going in and buying a pair of shoes, because there is a 3-size difference from one foot to the other. So I either have to pay for a pair and a half, or I have to buy 2 pair and make a pair that fits my foot. And she's very resentful of doing anything like that or even buying clothes for me. So the sad part is I'm only on SSI. I'm on a limited income because I couldn't get the best jobs. And yet she's so petty and so jealous of what I have because she wants what we have, and yet she gets her her teacher's pension, and because she also worked in retail, she gets Social Security. She has two different incomes coming in, plus she gets all the interest from the stocks and bonds and things that my father set up that were to take care of all of us, and only does what she has to do, and then will scream and yell at you because you're the one at fault. So remember, these are patterns that go on in families. So in a toxic work culture, a bad leader might blame their employees for failures instead of taking responsibility for poor decisions. Coworkers might throw each other under the bus to protect their own job security. When blame becomes a pattern in the workplace, it leads to low morale, distrust, and a culture where people focus on avoiding mistakes rather than learning from them. This is why in the corporate world, there is so much burnout. And today, whereas through the 80s and 90s of the 20th century, more or less, you had, especially in the 80s, you had job guarantees in the corporation. Whereas today, there's no such thing as a guaranteed job for life anymore. And this is really something that I've addressed and talked about in other ways also. Because when we look at what is going on in the culture of the corporation today, many managers and middle managers during the 90s were being let go because corporations had merged and they had to cut jobs. And today, and at that time, they gave you buyout packages. Today, when you leave a corporation, there's no such thing as a buyout package because there's no such thing as a guaranteed job anymore. Social and cultural influences, scapegoating in communities or organizations. In broader society, we see blame being used as a tool to shift responsibility away from systematic issues. Groups or individuals might be scapegoated for problems rather than addressing the root cause. This kind of blaming can lead to discrimination, social division, and people being unfairly targeted for things that they have no control over. Now, let's deal with the psychological effects of both the blamer and the blame, because this is the root of how it all gets started. But what happens when blame becomes a way of life? The truth is, it affects both the blamer and the blame in serious ways. For the person being blamed, constantly being blamed can lead to self doubt, anxiety, and low self esteem. If you're always being told something is your fault, you might start believing it, even when it's not true. Over the time, this can lead to feelings of helplessness and even depression. For the people being are doing the blaming. While blaming might give them a temporary sense of control, it prevents real growth. They never take responsibility for their actions, which means they don't learn from their mistakes. This can lead to strained relationships, a lack of accountability, and an inability to develop emotional maturity. In the end, the blame game doesn't solve problems, it just creates more of them. And if left unchecked, it can turn into a toxic cycle that's difficult to break. Now, one thing that I can say is if you have gone through therapy and it hasn't been family therapy, and your family refuses to get help, what I found and what I've often suggested to clients is get away from them. If they were a stranger, you would not have anything to do with them. Why should you continue to have a relationship with family members just because they're family members? They're mentally ill, they will never change, and they're always going to blame you for their problems. The blame game as a tool for abuse. And this is the big thing because if someone is an abuser, they will always be an abuser. We've talked about why people play the blame game and how it shows up in different areas of life. But what happens when blaming isn't just an occasional bad habit, but a weapon used to manipulate and control? That's when it crosses the line into emotional and psychological abuse. And this is something that I know firsthand. And luckily for me, my background became mental health and psychology, and I understood what was going on within my family. And I knew that in my case, I was better off on the street than being around them. And I was on the street several times, not because I couldn't hold a job, but because I couldn't get the best jobs. Most of the jobs that I got were because I'm a good speaker on the phone. Things that I got bored with. I don't like repeating myself over and over again. I like interacting with people. I don't like sitting at a booth and having to sit there and constantly now. I just it's not part of my personality to be able to do that. And those jobs were low paying jobs. And because I didn't have a family that believed in me and supported me and encouraged me to succeed, I had to always figure out a way to survive on my own. And it really took me many years. And there were certain goals that I wanted in life that I would have achieved had I had the money. But once I was able to move my business onto the internet and do things like a podcast or create my e-learning courses, which were the things that I was doing offline, but I had to have the mobility to be able to get to the corporations, to sit down with them, and not having that was what kept me from achieving a lot of my goals. Not that I couldn't do it, but when you don't have your own car and you have to depend on public transportation and they only go certain places, then it's very difficult to be able to get to the places you need to go. That's what held me back, not that I couldn't do it. And if my family would have been willing to understand and sit down with me and figure out a plan on how they could help me get that mobility. And then once I got where I wanted to go, pay them back. It would have been far easier. They could have been paid back 10 times over. But because they didn't see that potential in me, because that was where society was and how it looked at people with disabilities, I didn't always have the opportunity. But that's why I do what I do to help others succeed in their chosen field and get the right mindset to achieve their goals, because that also plays a role in how successful you are. So, blame is powerful. It can be used to manipulate someone into feeling guilty, responsible, or even worthless, especially when the person doing the blaming is someone close to them. So let's break down the different ways blame can be used as a tool for manipulation and abuse, and the impact it has on victims. One of the most insidious ways blame is used to manipulate people is through gaslighting. If you're not familiar with the term, gaslighting is when someone makes you question your own reality, memories, or feelings. My sister abuses people, steals from people, and then she acts like she has no idea what you're talking about. Literally. So realize when people are doing things like that, it's their way of deflecting on their own bad behavior. Let's say you confront someone about something hurtful they did. Instead of taking responsibility, they respond with, "That never happened. You're imagining things. You're too sensitive. You always overreact. You must be crazy to think I would do something like that." It's like my sister will sit there and lie to your face and then say, "I never lie. I never lie. When did I do? What did I do?" You know, she knows what she's done, but it's her way of deflecting and putting off on you that she doesn't want to accept responsibility for her own behavior. These statements are designed to make you doubt yourself rather than hold them accountable. Over time, gaslighting can make you feel confused, insecure, and like you can't trust your own judgment. The more you internalize this, the easier it becomes for a manipulator to maintain control over you. Guilt tripping, emotional manipulation to control others. Another way blame is used is a form of emotional abuse, is through guilt tripping. This happens when someone makes you feel responsible for the emotions and actions even when they've done nothing wrong. And this is a behavior that my mother constantly did. I can remember many years ago, I was hurting because of the way I was being treated, and I was in my room crying. And my mother sat there and said to me, "Why are you crying? You have no reason to cry." You know, I did have a reason to cry. And understanding that in myself, and look, it was like she was so out of touch. Her way of dealing with any issue that was a problem was to ignore it and pretend it didn't happen and pretend it didn't exist. It's like the ostrich that buried its head in the sand. And if it doesn't exist, there's no problem. Have you ever had someone say things like, "After everything, I've done for you. This is how you treat me? If you really cared about me, you wouldn't make me feel like this way. You're so selfish. You only think about yourself. And those are common things that someone will use to guilt trip you into doing what they want you to do. And then promising you things that they never have any intention of doing. This kind of manipulation is meant to make you feel bad, even when you've done nothing wrong. It's a way of controlling your actions by making you prioritize their feelings over your own. People who guilt trip often avoid accountability by shifting the emotional burden onto you, playing the victim, shifting focus to appear innocent. Another toxic tactic used in the blame game is playing the victim. This is when the person who should be taking responsibility for their actions flips the script and makes it seem like they are the one being wronged. That's very common, especially if someone feels like a victim themselves. In transactional analysis, there's a triangle: the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. And this was a game that my mother and my sister would try to play on me constantly. And I was aware of it. And I would turn away and walk away from them. And I would not interact with them. And they couldn't deal with it because they wanted me to be the victim. And I knew I wasn't. And I knew it was their game of control, because this is how they created a toxic environment. When you confront a friend about betraying your trust, and instead of apologizing, they say, "Wow, I guess I'm just a terrible person then." A toxic partner cheats and then says, "If you had paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." A manipulative parent criticizes you constantly, then says, "I'm just trying to help you. I guess I'm a horrible parent for caring too much." By shifting the focus to their suffering, they avoid taking responsibility and make you feel guilty instead of suddenly you're the one apologizing, even though they were the one who did something wrong. Do you know that my sister won't help me for one reason? Because when Adult Protective Services came over and interviewed them, she wants me to apologize to her. She was the one that was abusing my sister, had Adult Protective Services called on her, and then she wants me to apologize to her for calling them on her because she did nothing wrong. You know, that just shows you how manipulative she is. And my mother knew that about her and still left everything to her. And she's so petty and so jealous of both her sisters. And my older sister had to have a second knee replacement. So someone said to someone else, "Oh, what a good sister she is, because she came in to take care of her for a month." Well, that's because she doesn't want to pay someone to be living with her and overseeing her and making sure that she's taken care of. It's not that she can't take care of herself, but because she became that my older sister became so dependent on my mother and so dependent on other people, because my mother constantly constantly told her, "You're helpless, you're worthless, you can't live on your own, you can't hold a job, you can't manage money." And they constantly told her how she's poor. And yes, she never, and the sad part is there were jobs for people with that were deaf. She could have gotten a job far easier than I could have. She was training at that time to do DOS and was very good at it because her personality was very reserved. She can sit in one place for hours and not be disturbed. And and yet, instead of working with the rehabilitation counselor to see to it that my sister had a job that she could do, my mother did everything to sabotage the whole thing and making her dependent on her to the point that now she's so lost, she doesn't know how to do the basic things for herself, like brush her teeth or take a bath. Just self care. This is what long term impact on victims that can happen to someone. Being constantly blamed, gaslighted, or guilt tripped takes a serious toll on a person's mental and emotional well being. Over time, victims of this kind of abuse experience self doubt. When you're always told you're the problem, you start believing it. You second guess yourself, even in a situation where you know you're right. Anxiety and stress, walking on eggshells around someone who constantly blames you, creates an overwhelming sense of fear and anxiety. You never know when you're going to be blamed for something next. This is something that my older sister does. She is so afraid of my younger sister that she allows her to continue to abuse her and doesn't speak up to protect herself. Diminished self worth. The more you're made to feel like you're always wrong or not good enough, the harder it becomes to see your own value. This can lead to low self esteem and even depression. Feeling trapped when blame is used as a form of control. Victims may feel like they can't escape the situation, whether it's a toxic relationship, family dynamic, or workplace environment. The cycle of blame makes it hard to break free. And think about all of those things. This is why recognizing the blame is so important. The more aware you are of the tactics, the better you can protect yourself from manipulation and emotional harm. So, what we need to do now is talk about breaking free of the blame game. We've talked about how the blame game can be used to manipulate, control, and emotionally harm others. Now let's shift gears to focus on how to protect yourself. The good news, you don't have to be a victim of manipulative blame. You can recognize it, be set boundaries, and stand your ground. Let's talk about how to break the cycle of the blame and reclaim your emotional power. The first step of protecting yourself is recognizing when someone is using blame as a manipulation tactic. Here are some flags to watch for. You're always the problem. No matter what happens, somehow it's always your fault. The other person never takes responsibility. And remember when I said my sister now blames me because, and it was that I owe her an apology for calling the adult protective service? That's because she does not want to accept the fact that she doesn't have a right to abuse her sisters because she thinks she does. Because she was allowed to do it for over 50 years or more. Because she's now 71. And you got to remember, since the time she was a teenager, she has been using the blame game to 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 see her, to make herself feel better about herself, because she sees herself as the victim. And that's the sad part. She's not the victim. She's the perpetrator of everything that goes wrong in her life, but she doesn't want to accept it. So remember, this is how they use the blame game to control you, to manipulate you, to get what they want because they feel so bad about themselves. You're always the problem. No matter what happens, somehow it's always your fault. The other person never takes responsibility. You feel guilty for things that aren't your responsibility. If you constantly feel like you have to apologize or make things right, even when you didn't do anything wrong, you're likely being manipulated. They twist the facts, they bring up a concern, and suddenly the conversation is about something you did wrong instead. You know, when I would talk to my mother and I would tell her, "You're lying. You're lying." And this lying was her way of saying and doing things and then making you feel like you were the wrong because she actually believed her lies. My sister also believes her lies. They use shame and guilt to control you. You have phrases like, "You're too sensitive. If you really cared about me, you do what I say. I guess I'm just a bad person then." You feel drained and anxious around them. Instead of resolving conflicts, interactions leave you feeling confused, guilty, or emotionally exhausted. And that's because many times the person who's at fault, they don't want to accept responsibility for their issues, and it's easier for them to blame you rather than accepting responsibility and being willing to change their behavior or being willing to get the help they need. So, if this sounds familiar, it's time to take back control. Once you recognize manipulative blame, the next step is setting boundaries. This means refusing to accept responsibility for the things that aren't yours to own. Here's how you can start setting boundaries. Don't apologize when you haven't done anything wrong. If someone tries to guilt trip you, resist the urge to immediately say sorry just to keep the peace. Instead, respond with neutral statements like, "I understand you're upset, but I'm not responsible for that. I won't take responsibility for something I didn't do." Call out blame, shifting behavior. If someone twists the situation to make it seem like you're the problem, bring the focus back to the real issue. I'm happy to discuss this. but I won't take the blame for something that isn't my fault. Stay firm and don't engage in guilt tripping. When someone tries to guilt trip you, don't let their emotions dictate your response. Instead, say, I understand how you feel, but my feelings matter too. I won't be manipulated into feeling guilty for setting a boundary. The key is to stand your ground while remaining calm and confident. Assertive communication strategies to shut down the blame. Now, let's talk about how to communicate assertively when dealing with someone who blames you unfairly. Assertive communication means being direct and respectful while refusing to let someone control the conversation through blame or guilt. Here are a few techniques. Use I statements instead of defensive. Say I and express how you feel without escalating the situation. I feel uncomfortable when I'm blamed for things that aren't my responsibility. I need us to have a conversation where we both take accountability, not just me. Stay focused on the facts. When someone tries to twist the situation, bring it back to reality. I hear what you're saying, but let's stick to what actually happened. That's not how it happened. Let's focus on finding a solution instead of pointing fingers. Know when to walk away. If someone refuses to have a productive conversation and just keeps blaming, disengage, you can say, I'm open to talking when we can do it in a respectful way. I won't continue this conversation if it's just about blaming me. Remember when I talked about the TA triangle of the persecutor, the victim, and the rescuer? The rescuer and the persecutor have to be willing to engage in conversation, because if they're going to stay rigid in their roles and constantly make you the victim, the best thing you can do is disengage from them and have no relationship with them. Because then, if they can't use you as their I can't think of the word, as their anyway, and I still can't. Anyway, so if they can't use you as their battering ram to and make you the victim, then they don't know how to communicate and don't care to communicate in a healthy way. My sister would have a habit of calling, telling me what she wanted, didn't want to hear what I had to say, and would just hang up on me and thought nothing of it. The goal is not to win in an argument, but make it clear that you won't be manipulated. Because the thing is, they have to constantly win and having one up on you, because that's what gives them power. So, what you can do is seek support, therapy, a trusted friend, or professional advice. If you're dealing with chronic blame and manipulation and you don't have to go through it alone, seeking support is not a weakness, it's a strength. Here are some ways to get help. Talk to a trusted friend or family member. Sometimes just getting an outside perspective can help you see the situation clearly. Find someone who listens without judgment. Consider therapy or coaching. A therapist or a coach can help you develop stronger boundaries, confidence, and coping strategies to handle manipulative people. Join a support groups if the blame is coming from a toxic family, dynamic, or relationship. There are support groups where you can connect with others going through the same thing. You don't have to navigate this alone. Reach out, talk about it, and get the support you deserve. Encouraging accountability and healthy conflict resolutions in relationships. Now, let's talk about what healthy conflict resolution looks like, because the goal isn't just to protect yourself from blame, it's also to encourage a culture of accountability in relationships. Here are a few key principles. Own your mistake, but expect others to do the same. Taking responsibility for your actions is a sign of strength, but it should be mutual. If you're the only one ever apologizing, that's a red flag. This is why I found that in my situation, when I have a family that refuses to change, I cannot be around them and have very little interaction with my sister, just simply because of it. Encourage honest conversations. Healthy relationships are built on trust, not blame. Encourage open dialogue where both sides feel safe to express themselves without fear of being attacked. Focus on solutions, not blame. Instead of playing the blame game, shift the conversation to how can we fix this together? This creates a team mentality instead of an adversarial one. Set the expectation for respect. Let people know that you value honesty and expect mutual respect. If someone refuses to engage in healthy conflict resolution, it's okay to distance yourself from toxic dynamics. Ultimately, relationships thrive not on blame, but on accountability, understanding, and mutual effort. So let's recap. Recognize when someone is using blame to manipulate or control you. Set boundaries and refuse to accept misplaced guilt. Use assertive communication to stand your ground. Seek support if you need help navigating a toxic situation, and encourage accountability and healthy conflict resolution is your relationships. Blame should never be used as a weapon. The next time someone tries to shift responsibility onto you, remember you have the power to reject it. As we wrap up today, I want to leave you with an important question. Are you unknowingly enabling blame or even engaging in it yourself? It's easy to recognize when others are shifting blame onto us, but it's just as important to reflect on our own behaviors. Sometimes, without realizing it, we might be contributing to a blame filled dynamic, either by allowing others to blame us or by shifting blame ourselves. When we're uncomfortable facing responsibility, so let's take a moment for some honest self reflection. Ask yourself, Do I immediately apologize to keep the peace, even when I know I'm not at fault? It's yes, you may be enabling blame or allowing others to avoid accountability. Do I often feel responsible for other people's emotions or mistakes? If so, you might be absorbing blame that isn't yours to carry. When someone gets when something goes wrong, do you look for who's at fault instead of focusing on solutions? If this sounds familiar, you may be unintentionally engaging in blame rather than constantly problem solving. Have I ever engaged in someone else's mistake to avoid admitting my own? If so, it's worth considering whether blame has become a defense mechanism in your own life. Do I take responsibility for my actions, or do I find myself making excuses? True accountability means owning up to mistakes without shifting the focus onto someone else. The reality is, blame is a cycle. It takes two, one person to cast the blame and another to accept it. Breaking free requires both self awareness and setting boundaries. I challenge you to reflect, where do I stand in the blame game? Am I a target, an enabler, or something even the one placing the blame? Recognizing these patterns is the first step in crafting healthier, more honest relationships, both with others and with yourself. Now, the last thing that I'm going to say is this, that my mother and my younger sister always looked at what other people were doing and talk about how much money they had, the kind of car they drove, the kind of clothes they wore, because this was so important to them. Remember the expression of being jealous of the next family and wanting to have what they have instead of being happy with what you have? Well, that is someone who has very low self-esteem, and that they always want what the other person has. And that's why they tend to be the ones who will sit there and criticize you and blame you because they are not doing better. And they will steal from you to have better if it fits their pattern of life.